Welcome to TSRA Ricochet. Your host is Andi Turner, the Legislative Director podcast of the Texas State Rifle Association. We'll discuss your 2A rights, legislation, hunting, competition, you name it. Join in and be part of the discussion. Now here's your host, Andi Turner.
Welcome to TSRA 2A Ricochet, a brand new podcast about all things Second Amendment. I am your legislative director and hostess, Andi Turner. This is the fabulous president of the Texas State Rifle Association, Daryl Valdez, and this is our inaugural episode. We will get better as we go along, but we needed to start somewhere. So welcome, and we're glad to have you all. So Daryl, president of TSRA. That's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
So I guess first we should start with, I think everybody would want to know, what is your shooting background? Everybody's got their thing, right? Some are tactical, some are hunting. What's yours?
Well, first off, thank you for having me in your inaugural podcast. I'm super excited to be here. And yes, I am the current serving president of the Texas State Rifle Association. Very proud to be elected, and we're trying to work hard for the TSRA. And thank you for what you're doing for the TSRA members.
My pleasure.
To answer your question, so I have always had an interest in firearms before I could really afford to have them. Before we really had them in the house, my dad is a Vietnam veteran and saw some serious combat, and guns were probably his first love when he came back, and so it was just kind of one of those areas. But I had a good friend, James Thomas, who lived down the street from me. We were kids growing up, and in his household, they had guns and they went hunting, and it was always kind of one of those objects that I, kind of desired. And when I could afford after college, that's one of the things that I just started to do. And so I fancy myself a collector more than anything else. I've been hunting and enjoy hunting. It's just not something that I have the wherewithal to go do as frequently as you really need to do to be good at hunting, I believe. And so I can collect online. I can collect.
Well, you were involved with the Houston Gun Collectors, right?
Yes.
And probably still are.
I am still a member. I'm past president of the Houston Gun Collectors, and fabulous organization in Houston. Very large organization, very charitable in the Houston area, and puts on some fantastic gun shows. And yes, absolutely, that's. I found that organization through my dad, and we were both members. He was a member first, and so we started attending, and that's all she wrote. That just really kind of facilitated the collecting bug for me. Yeah.
Interesting. What's interesting to hear Daryl's story is my background in guns is very much the same. My dad, right? And when I talk to our membership, and when I talk to people who don't even belong to TSRA, and I say, what is your background in guns? And yeah, we all kind of, not everybody, but many, many people that I've spoken to, it's a family tradition, And when we were talking about, and we'll talk some about permitless carry in a hot minute, but I would talk to people about permitless carry, and I would say to them, so who put a gun in your hand the first time? And it was my dad, my mom, my aunt, my uncle, my grandfather. Mm-hmm. So it really is part of the fabric. Lovely quilt that is, yes, the fabric that is America.
You need the America, perhaps.
Yeah, so how did you find the TSRA, the Texas State Rifle Association?
Well, you heard me mention my best friend growing up. When we were little, his dad was a member of the NRA and the TSRAs. It turned out he had kind of their life certificate memberships on the wall, and I remember always, I always grew up in their household, more so than mine, and I remember seeing TSRA life membership, and I always thought that was cool. I wanted to, I knew what they were, so I wanted to become one. And once I graduated from college and had just a little bit of money, enough to do the installment plan, I signed up for a life membership, and that's all she wrote. And there was an opening for the director for gun collecting, or at least
right up your alley.
So I said, I'll throw my hat into there and see what I can contribute and try to pull the wagon instead of always riding in the wagon. So that's always kind of been my mindset. Is a lot of folks for the last 100 years have really fought to kind of keep our gun rights, and I thought it's my turn. This was then to kind of pull the cart along as well, instead of just being a rider in the back. So that's how I got started.
That's awesome. Okay, so that explains how you first got involved, and so you were a director, but jumping on board the executive committee, that's quite a jump. I mean, I have been on an executive board for a state association, not in this state. So I know that the level of work went from here to about here, and now you're president, so it's here. What made you decide to jump on the executive committee?
Well, I was, the director for gun collecting for TSRA for several years. I don't know what the math is, maybe 5 to 10 years. And then the whole time trying to contribute to some meager way of, again, trying to help the association, help the membership, writing articles or just volunteering at various events. I live in Houston, but driving to Dallas to staff some events.
Right.
Drive up early in the morning, drive back later that evening. And, I like to think a few of the then executive, directors and the EC, Executive Council, saw that, there's somebody that's really trying to do something. And kind of, I like to think earned a shot. And I think Dorsa Metter, past president, for maybe kind of encouraging me to kind of jump on board. And so I did, and, they voted me in and, or on, and you kind of start at the bottom as the secretary, and you do all the minutes, and
Right.
try to keep things intact, and
just
kind of additional workload comes treasurer, second vice president, first vice president. Try to do a good job, and otherwise, if it's working right, we'll get rid of you. Find someone else that filled that role. Right? We need people doing things, and hopefully. That's what I proved to do.
And we would encourage all of you to, if you have any desire to get involved at a little level or larger level, we need all the help we can get. We can never have too much help, whether it's being, whatever your expertise is.
Exactly.
If you want to help, and it doesn't have to be legislative, it could be tactical, it could be, we need all the help we can get. So, because we're spreading the good word.
If you're great at IT, we could use IT folks.
Oh,
if you're
yeah.
great at real estate, we could use real estate advice. There's always
something. So if you're interested in the Second Amendment and you have an expertise and you'd like to throw in, we will absolutely provide information to you. Yeah. So there will be, my email address will be on the screen, but it's Andi. For those of you on the podcast, it's Andi Turner. ANDITURNER at TSRA.com. Don't hesitate to email me if you want to be involved. Also, your thoughts on the podcast, absolutely, I'd be interested in those. We will be talking about some of the bills that passed this session, and if you have questions or you have a difference of opinion, I'm always interested in a difference of opinion because, gosh, how do you learn? So don't hesitate to reach out to me, and if you didn't write that down, you can go to the TSRA.com website and you can find me. But anyway, all right. So now that we've established El Presidente, and then just a tiny bit about me. I came on board a year ago. As a matter of fact, almost exactly a year ago. Having moved to Texas from Maryland, I was on the board. And I was chairman of the board in the Maryland State Rifle and Pistol Association. Moved to Texas and found TSRA, and wow, they hired me, and it's been a wonderful ride. And I have a board who backs me, and it's an amazing job, and I love it. I spend more hours on the phone, but I'm really happy doing that. So talking to people, and
it's a big state, and you've done a great job at it.
I love it. I really do. So anyway, for folks who are more interested in legislation than they are about our personal history, so the biggest bill I would say that passed this session is permitless carry. If you do not have the Texas Law Shield Guide to permitless carry, please do email me, Andi Turner, ANDI Turner at TSRA.com, and I will get that to you.
It's a great resource.
Yeah, it really is. Representative Matt Schaefer and Senator Brandon Creighton, and also Senator Schwartner. Did you know that Senator Creighton was in a car accident, I believe the night before the vote in the Senate, and he was damaged. I mean, he was. I'm not medical, and wasn't for me to get into his business. But at one point, he literally fell out of his chair, and they took him out, and he came around But he was determined to be on the floor for that vote. And I thought, wow, that's dedication, because he really should have been, I don't know where he should have been, but not sitting in his seats.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have been a legitimate reason to miss that vote. But he was determined to be there, and they brought him back. They stalled a little bit. I was sitting in the gallery, and they stalled a little bit till they could get him back on the floor, and then and that's how. But Senator Schwartner got it through the Senate, and of course this was Matt Schaefer's bill, Representative Matt Schaefer's bill in the first place, the thing that I want to make sure that everybody's aware of is that. This is not constitutional carry. Constitutional carry is if you are legal to buy it, you are legal to carry it. Fully, Vermont has never outlawed carry. So to say they have constitutional carry is, I mean, they kind of are the hallmark. But that's so funny because it's the home of Bernie Sanders, right? You would think, but no, they've never outlawed it. So this is permitless carry, so you don't need to have an LTC to carry. There are things you need to know before you decide to strap on and go carry. Like, for instance, like a really obvious one that pops to the top of my head is no campus carry. There are other things. There will be, or there should be.
Some defense prosecutions or
the LTC is a better deal legally, but. I fought like a dog. You fought like a dog for this bill because I know you came up and testified on a bunch of bills, and thank you for that. We had to make some compromises in order to get this through. Nothing that I don't think any of us could live with. I would not have agreed to that. The reason that this is not constitutional carry is because the compromise was misdemeanor B. If you've been found guilty of misdemeanor B, disorderly conduct with a gun, or disorderly conduct with violence, then you're going to take a timeout. So
5 years.
Yeah, well, you have to finish whatever the courts say, to be fully finished with everything with the courts, and then the 5-year ticker starts. So technically not constitutional carry, but I mean, so often disorderly conduct with violence is what they plead domestic violence down to. It was something I could live with. It was a compromise that I could live with. And also, disorderly conduct with a gun. I mean, if you're gonna be stupid with a gun, take the time out. So I didn't think it was anything that most reasonable people couldn't live with. But that is the difference, and that's why we don't refer to it as constitutional carry, but you can refer to it any way you want.
Commonly on the street, it's known as constitutional carry here for things I've seen in red.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Is that right? Okay. So, but that is the difference.
Yeah, there is a fine difference for sure.
Yeah. So, anything else?
I'll advocate for some of the questions I've received that we've all received that are natural to ask is, well, should I get a concealed carry license now that this is passed? And I'll tell you, as somebody who's a gun collector, that yes, absolutely, because
I agree.
You can now go to, and has been since '95, you can go to a gun show, go to a gun store, and if the NIC system is offline, you still get to buy that new pistol, that new rifle. If it's hunting season, you got to kind of get and go, you can do that. You're not waiting for the weekend or several days perhaps until they get the NIC system back up and running. Right. And you can do that with a concealed carry license, and that is maintained. So I would always encourage folks to get a concealed carry license.
If you have your LTC, renew it. What permitless carry got us was we didn't need permission from the government to carry anymore. And that's why I fought very hard for this. Is I want the government out of my constitutional rights as much as possible. So this is a great bill by great sponsors, and people literally gave up their health to get this bill through. So it's a great bill. That said, 2 weeks after the bill signing, I was on the range with my instructor, getting my shooting test for my LTC, and because when you compare both, legally you have defenses having an LTC that you don't have, that you're not afforded under permitless carry if you're involved in a shooting. So but I'll give you an example of a non-shooting difference, and that is if you blow through it's called a 30-05 sign, or any sign, the gun buster sign. If you blow through that let's say you're carrying concealed and you've forgotten you had it on, you blow through it, and somebody says, hey man, you can't be in here with that. If you decide that you're going to be that person and not leave, it's a $4,000 fine. Permitless carry has a $4,000 fine, and I believe it's a misdemeanor B, so you get some issues. Whereas with your LTC, it's a $200 fine, and you get to keep your LTC because they inherently understand that you know what the law is, because you have to know the law to get your LTC. So they know you know what the law is, and chances are good you're not just standing there being a jerk about it. You know, you blew through it. And so
finish your business and leave. That's
right. Just so
apologize and go.
Yep.
Don't get any records.
Yep. So that's the biggest bill. In terms of, you brought up emails and questions and stuff like that. The other question that I get quite a bit in email and phone calls is on suppressors. So Representative Alverson, and I believe he's your rep, right?
He is, my rep out of the North Houston Tomball area.
Yeah, and Senator Drew Springer, north of Dallas, I believe, got the Texas-made suppressor bill through. The first thing I want to say to you is, ain't nobody getting a Texas-made suppressor this Christmas, and they may not be getting one next Christmas. The first thing that has to happen is that someone who wants to make these things should not be an FFL. I know any FFL who's watching this already got their little letter from the ATF, which I said back in June was coming. So don't be an FFL because you could lose your license. But if Daryl, for instance, who is not an FFL, although you may be a Curio and Relics.
I don't have it.
Okay. Who is not an FFL, if Daryl decides that he wants to create Texas-made suppressors, it's a tall order. He has to go to the Attorney General, and they have to go seek declaratory judgment, which basically gives him a legal leg to stand on in the court system. And then once he's taken care of that, then he has to go find all Texas-made parts. And that means the unmachined metal, that means all the parts. The only part that is in the bill that they made an allowance for is like if there's a screw that you could use in a chair or in a table or in a lamp or whatever. If it's a minor part and it's in common use, that's a little different. If anybody wants to get involved in this, again, you need to email me because there's things you need to know. But this is going to work its way through the court system. I like this bill. I like it because it does not interfere with interstate commerce. It is different than the way Kansas did their bill. Kansas, as I understand it, and maybe somebody will correct me, I'm happy to be corrected, but as I understand it, Kansas basically said, well, if you make it in Texas, it didn't matter where the parts came from, and make it in Kansas. Kansas basically said that if you put together this suppressor in Kansas, and it doesn't matter where the parts came from, and you stamp it made in Kansas, then it's okay. Well, ATF said no dice. They took them to court, and people actually got into large trouble. Mm-hmm. So what I like about this bill is it's entirely, you can't take a Texas suppressor out of state. You can't, it has to all be made in state. I think this bill's got a heck of a chance in court, states' rights, 10th Amendment being a thing.
Exactly.
So, but it's going to take some time, so just chillax. We're all chillaxing, waiting for our Texas-made cans. So you can either do that or you can go get the stamp from ATF if you don't want to wait. But if you're waiting on Representative Oliverson and Senator Springer's bill, hang tight. Anything I missed on that?
No, actually, one thing that I think that's important to restate that you mentioned is how important the fight is for the 10th Amendment, states' rights, and the Bill of Rights is prescribes exactly what we can do and what the government doesn't do, and that line by the misuse of the Interstate Commerce Clause for the last 100 years has just been really bastardized, and so I think it's important that we start to claw back some of those legislative rights that we have owned and I see this bill, Kansas's bill, and others are in sanctuary bills, which we'll probably talk about here in a minute, or other attempts by local and state governments to separate that line or rebuild that fence. And I think that's super, super important. It's done brick by brick. So it'll be a test case in suppressors.
Yeah. And we'll be reporting on it. If you're not on my email, you can go to TSRA-PAC.com and get on my emails. I wish you would be a member of TSRA, but to get my emails, you don't have to be, but please do. I'm going to skip because we're running out of time. So I think an interesting bill that a lot of people haven't heard about is the hotel bill. Thank you, Senator Donna. Thank you, Senator Donna Campbell and Representative Cole Hefner for passing the hotel bill. You can now go to any hotel in the state of Texas and don't wander around the hotel. But if you're carrying or you have your gun and your ammo in a case, you may go directly to your room and directly to your car. Don't go to the restaurant. Don't go to the coffee cart.
Cool.
I'm not even sure about registering it with it on, but you may now. There were about 20%, 25% of the hotels in Texas that were like, no guns, and people were showing up and having to stow their guns in the car. So that was a problem. And Senator Donna Campbell actually I think I heard her say that she had a problem with this. And so she brought this bill forward, and it's rock on. So now you can travel and not have to worry about showing up with a 30-06 or 30-07 sign or even a 30-05. Just keep it out of sight, whether it's in a case or concealed or whatever. They don't want you wandering around open carry. But, I mean, fair. So
I'll give you some color on this bill, Andy, of where I think this bill is so much more important than many folks may not realize it, but I've learned at least in the last year that Texas has become one of the top worldwide destinations for international hunters, right?
That makes sense.
The climate and the amount of wild African game that's now raised on ranches, high fence ranches here in Texas. Right. I've heard, you prove me if I'm incorrect, correct if I'm incorrect, is that we have some populations of African game larger here in Texas than or what are left in Africa. So, it's a natural draw for hunters. And so that's big business.
Yeah.
It's expensive to be a big game hunter. And so they're coming to Texas and they may be bringing their own firearms in if they're just driving across, flying across. And so they now have to keep those firearms in a exposed, trunk in a parking lot outside of, pick a small city and big town. Right. That's a risk for those firearms aren't cheap, and so I'm really, really glad Senator Campbell and others pushed for this bill because it's important. Absolutely.
All right, so we're going to stop there, and I want to thank you all for participating in the inaugural episode of TSRA 2A Ricochet. Thank you so much, President Valdez, for joining us, and we will see you next time. Look for those emails when a new episode drops. We'll be sending out an email. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to TSRA 2A Ricochet with your host, Andi Turner, the Legislative Director podcast of the Texas State Rifle Association. And until next time, you can find out more at TSRAPAC.com and TSRA.com.